to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 802. The SPaMCAST 802 features a panel discussion. Mark Metze, Jeremy WIllets, and myself discuss, is Agile still a movement, or has it reached middle age? We weigh the appropriateness of wailing and gnashing of teeth, hand-wringing and sullen withdrawal, or pragmatism and philosophy. In the end, perhaps the right answer is to buy a pair of mom or dad jeans and accept that all great movements reach middle age at some point. We look forward to your opinions and comments. Some background on our panelists. Mark Metze. With a career spanning over 30 years in the software industry, Mark has evolved from a seasoned developer, dedicating 19 years to crafting high-quality and maintainable code that directly addressed real-world challenges. Transitioning to management, he spent 9 years doing that, developing teams, gaining a holistic perspective on various roles crucial for successful software delivery. Embracing the philosophy of servant leadership, he transitioned once again to the role of Scrum Master. Over the last 3.5 years, each week, its mission is providing agile insight into human values and behaviors through genuine connections. You can listen on your favorite podcast platform or on the web, link in the show notes at theagilewithin.buzzsprout.com. Jeremy WIllets is a coach, speaker, author. I know he's an author. He actually co-authored Mastering Work Intake with me, who has spent the last decade working with people and teams to achieve greatness in the workplace. He started out as a technical writer on a Scrum team and quickly fell in love with Scrum and the Agile Manifesto values and principles. Since then, he's served thriving organizations as a Scrum Master, Agile Coach, Senior Agile Coach, Release Train Engineer, People Manager, and Mentor. Jeremy has spoken at conferences throughout the Midwestern United States. He's an avid Subtrack blogger and music maker and holds a SAFe SBC certification. Jeremy can be found at jeremywillets.com. Link again in the show notes. Are you ready to check whether or not you're wearing mom and dad jeans? It's time for the conversation. Gentlemen, Mark Metze, Jeremy WIllets, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Glad to be here.
This will be you somewhere in the 810-ish region when this gets posted. So, this is... once upon a time, I actually thought about cutting this thing off at 800, and obviously I have failed miserably in that goal in my life. My wife is still unhappy that I spend Sunday mornings working on this, but I hope everyone listening enjoys it. Gentlemen, I'd like today to be somewhat philosophical. After you've done 800 of these, philosophical sometimes works. Jürgen Applo, Management 3.0, amongst other things, recently said, Agile is dissolving. And, there is a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. I mean, I think all of us probably spend a little time on things like LinkedIn and things like that. Has Agile reached middle age?
Well, Tom, I'll take that one first. I haven't read what Jürgen's going after with that word dissolving, but, when I read it, I think that maybe what he's going after is the fact that Agile and that mode of operation has just become the standard that most enterprises use at this point. When I talk to people that are maybe new to Agile, what I try and talk to them about is not Scrum, it's not SAFe. It's, hey, we want to get better at working together. We want to get better at collaborating with our customers. And we ultimately want to deliver things that are going to provide value to our businesses. And those kind of three things are hard to argue against. So maybe that's where Jürgen's coming from with this whole Agile is dissolving or the Agile is dead movement. What do you think, Mark?
Before you go, I would argue that is exactly, and I'll date myself. I'd argue that that's exactly what we were talking about and putting in place in the lean and the quality movement in the 1980s, last century. So, if that's de rigueur at this point, I'm a little cautious in terms of it has become de rigueur. Mark?
So I read that article and I'm trying to go back. And I know Jurgen chose his words very carefully because he did not say Agile is dead or dying. I think that's important to make a distinction. And I believe he was talking about dissolving and talking about what does dissolving mean. And you think if you drop like a tablet into a water and it dissolves, it spreads out into the entire liquid, right? So it goes from a tablet form and then it permeates throughout the whole liquid. And I think that's what he was after, is that we've kind of gone beyond the stage of these big upfront plannings, and Agile is sort of coming de facto of a standard. Maybe not, I guess I would say little a Agile, not big A Agile. If Tom, if you and Jeremy resonate with that, and if our listeners resonate with that.
I've never been a fan of big A Agile, but I get in trouble. And I think our editor went through and changed all of the word Agile to a capital in our book recently. But philosophically, I'm with you, Mark. It has permeated. At least parts of it have permeated. Having been in this industry long enough, when things permeate and become commonplace, they stop being a movement. They stop having, the great conferences. There's a lot of other things that fall off the table. Again, I'm thinking middle-aged, right? Where it's just not, it's not necessarily going away. Nothing goes away, but it isn't quite the movement that it once was. At least it doesn't feel like the movement.
Do you think that's because a couple of things are running through my head right now, Tom? Do you think it's because we've maybe reached the stage where exposing new companies to this way of working is not a new thing? I think in most big organizations, you're going to find at least a couple Agile teams, whether they're working on sort of cutting edge technology or whether they're over in the IT department. Perhaps we're past the stage of large, full scale enterprise transformation. So maybe that's why people are thinking Agile is dead. Maybe we're past that as an industry. I don't know. The other thing
I'm not sure middle-aged and dead are synonymous.
They're not. The other thing that runs through my mind is the change that I know I've seen in my company. The change in employees, the age of employees is changing pretty drastically in the company that I work in. I think I've told this story before on the podcast, but one of the first teams that I worked with when I joined this company was a team full of people that had been at the company for longer than I'd been alive. Also, there were people on this team that had been, just out of college. And so I think the workforce is changing. Obviously, younger people are joining the IT workforce and they have different expectations about how to do work. Maybe they get exposed to the manifesto in college. Maybe they get exposed to things like Scrum and Scaled Agile throughout college courses or curriculum. So when they get into their actual desks and into their actual teams, they know what to expect. It's not a transformation for them. It's a standard mode of operation.
Transformations are hard when you're coming from the ground up. So I'll just tell a story from my past. I think, Tom, you and Jeremy are both come from an engineering background as I did. And so I was a computer science major, and like all good little computer science majors, started as a programmer as my first job and did that for almost just shy of 2 decades. And as I was getting to the end of before I pivoted into a management position, I was working at a place and it was instituted that we were going to do feature-driven development. And all of a sudden, things changed from one day to the next. And we started doing these very deep dive requirement documents, having these Fagan inspections where we had a panel that would go through and examine the requirements, making sure that they were all complete before we got started. And, I'll just share, as a developer, I just wanted to get to work and just code. And to be honest with you, it led to me leaving the company because it didn't feel, I wasn't fulfilled and I wasn't happy doing that. So I chose to work for a much smaller company that was a financial based company where I could just be a cowboy and just do what I wanted to do. And I wonder if that aspect of these big transformations just turn developers off to the point that they're kind of digging their heels in now and just saying, I don't want to be told what to do. I just want to work. I want some autonomy.
Yeah.
Well, how much autonomy is right, good? I
mean, it comes with guardrails, I would hope. I think that the Agile literature that we probably all know and love speaks a lot about team autonomy, but the reality of the scenario is you can't just come into work and do whatever you want. There needs to be autonomy with some guardrails. And so whether you're following Scrum or Scaled Agile, there's guardrails in place about what to work on generally. We have our backlogs of stuff to do. We expect people to work together in teams. So I think that, autonomy is a great thing, but I've seen scenarios where there was autonomy without those guardrails. And what ends up happening is people just come into work and kind of do what they want. And before you know it, there's been multiple years without getting anything delivered. And everybody's kind of staring at each other going, what the hell happened?
I think I worked at that company too.
I don't like diets, so I just want to eat whatever I want to eat. Maybe that works in your 20s, but as you get older, maybe I do need some guardrails.
It does, and but I would also like to think that the people that we work with are professionals. We come to work to get paid, but we intrinsically want to do work that is good for people, that serves people, whether we're serving internal customers or external customers. And so, if I'm in a scenario where I'm coming into work, I'm doing what I think is the right thing, but there's no tangible delivery of value to anybody else. At some point, I'm probably going to reach the same point that you got to, Mark, at your other career, where it's I'm going to get so frustrated that I'm going to go somewhere else where I have a direct line to providing value to customers.
Who owns that connection? I mean, where does that connection come from?
The connection with customers?
Yeah, to value, to delivering something that I might perceive to have value. I remember a period of time, and again, I'll go back a little bit, because I don't have to, because I heard it the other day, where development, R&D, whatever word you want to call it, has decided that they know better than the business what the business needs for value. And they're making those choices for them. And that's, in the long run, I think that's about as nutty as a fruitcake.
Yeah. I hope this whole Agile thing helps us get to that point where people know what the work they're doing is going to deliver to customers. I've said this a lot within the past few years at my current company. This Agile thing is not just about getting the development teams to function better. It's about really bridging the gap between the technologists and the business people to make sure that there's a cohesive vision for products and to make sure there's common understanding, common levels of prioritization, and that the work that we're doing in engineering is actually satisfying customer needs and helping our businesses and customers.
Mark, do you see that connection in your end of the world?
So as a Scrum Master, definitely I empathize and strive for that. So it's interesting because it depends on what type of company you're working at. So if you're working for, let's just say, an insurance company, because I have a background in working for insurance, and you're writing a policy system, many times your customers that you're developing for are internal. It's the people within the company that you're developing for, and that feedback loop is much easier to get to. But if you're, let's say, if you're working on a site, let's take Facebook just for instance. How does Facebook reach out? They don't just go out to a customer and just say, "Hey, can I sit with you for a little?" Maybe they do. They're mega huge, but the customer is much further away from you. So it's a challenge when you're working B2B versus B2C in that. So that's a challenge that I've had. What approaches have y'all had when your customer is far away like that on trying to get direct feedback?
I mean, there's the proxy approach. I think that's probably a pretty classic approach. You appoint, quote unquote, somebody to serve as that customer proxy internally, whether they're a classic product owner role or a product manager or a marketing person or a salesperson. I think that's probably a classic pattern.
I think that's the easy answer, especially for an organization that it's the software it's using is, directly linked to the product. But when you're in a support role and you're not on, if you're going to classically do a Porter value chain, that you're just off to the side as support. You're HR or your finance. They're never on the value chain. If that's true, then it's really hard to make that connection. I know that it's an internal client, but very frankly, they're going to be stretched as thin as paper, and they're not going to have time. The proxy then ends up being the team lead or the department manager in IT. And again, I would suggest that a lot of, the market in terms of developers, that's the role they're playing. They're not in a product role. They're not delivering on the value chain. The answer is they're not getting that connection. And therefore, that's where I think some of this frustration comes from. I mean, it would be nice, right? It would be nice if you had that intimate relationship with your customer. I was in the credit card world. We did. Especially our internal ones. We sat at their desks and had those intimate conversations. That was we were incredibly productive. We did what was necessary. We also blew up using MasterCard once, but life's hard, then you die. Again, I think it's a much, much broader mixed bag at this point. Still.
Worked at a company where you had a user conference and had your customers come for the user conference, and they've been saving up feedback for a year to unload on you on this one day.
Yeah.
Actually, we have.
I think that's definitely, Tom and I used to work at a place that had a user conference, and I don't know if people would save feedback up for that, but I do remember it being a seminal, pivotal event every year. And it wasn't something that people looked at with dread. It was something that people, particularly the engineers that Tom and I worked with, they were eager to go talk to customers. They were eager to show off the most recent things they've been working on, because as I reflect back on that company and how that company operated, it really was one of the few chances that they had to get in front of customers and get actual bona fide feedback. And I think that, those opportunities were few and far between. We had grown quite a bit as a company, and the days of the startup mindset where you're sending people and teams out to go sit at customers' desks and understand what they need from firsthand knowledge, those days were long gone. They were in the rearview mirror of that company, and we were getting to the point where we needed to build products that satisfied multiple customer needs. And so you can't just put your development team on planes all year and have them fly across the globe to see how different customers in different geographies are using them. You have to sort of approximate a solution, build what you think is going to suit a lot of customer needs. And then that particular user conference was a chance to show that off. And, the kind of feedback we got varied wildly sometimes. Sometimes it was like, you hit the mark, fantastic. Here's a couple more ideas for things. We can use this product right now. Other times it was not so great.
How about you, Mark? Have obviously you brought that up. Is that something that's in your past? Or is it in your present?
It's not in my present, but it is in my past. So I was in a different role because I was a manager. So when the engineers went, of course, they got to show off the latest and greatest, and they were the heroes, right? It was like, oh, I love what you've been working on. But from a management point of view, I had the customers coming to me saying, I want to set up a 30-minute meeting here during this window with Mark because I want to talk about what I need. And I've been asking for this for 2 years now, and it's not in. Why has this not been done? I think I tried that once, and it failed miserably.
So what did you say at that point? Was it yes and put it on the backlog or jump the queue?
Well, so very empathetic, definitely listened, wanted to get their point of view. And so what I try to do is document as much as I could of the pain that this person was having so that I could communicate it to product and the other developers so they would not just know, all right, we don't have this feature and someone's claiming for, but what pain is it really causing them?
So you became the
their
proxy.
day-to-day. So
you became
I was the proxy. That's a good point. That's a good point.
But why did they come to you versus going to their product point?
It was probably a combination of the two. I did have lots of slots taken up. So product had lots of slots taken up. And sometimes it was product and me sitting together. But you know what really helps is for them to see the vision of where you're going, right? And be able to paint that they can, and sometimes they understand and sometimes they don't, because let's be real, they've got a job to do. And if they can't do it, great that you have these plans to service all these customers, but this is my problem and this is what I need solved.
Yeah, especially if you have multiple customers with multiple needs. It's easier if you're serving a specific internal client. That's an easier prioritization. Gentlemen, what does healthy Agile look like? We're halfway through the 2020s. What does healthy Agile look like?
I'd like to think that it's sustainable pace. It's not burning people out for the sake of developing products. I'd also like to think it's getting things done that our customers need us to do. I think that those are like the fundamental aspects of an Agile culture. I think it's like treating your people well, giving them the ability to hopefully grow in their careers, but also at the end of the day, satisfying the needs of the customers that are helping keep our businesses afloat.
So I will say yes and choose those words, but I'll go in a little bit different direction. And I always take it back to thinking about the word Agile and what does Agile mean? And when I think of agility and Agile, I think of that classic scene that you see on a nature documentary of like a cheetah chasing an antelope, right? An animal that's very moving fast, but able to change directions very quickly and very calculated and moving. So for me, Agile is how can we adjust, make plans and adjust so that we're not locked into I'm giving air quotes. I always do that. Yeah, I really do need to find a YouTube channel because people need to see these air quotes, but so that we really can be agile and adjust to our plan. So it's really experimenting and adjusting because plans, it's not just the plans, but it's the planning and the conversations that come and us being able to change directions and admit that we're wrong sometimes, right? And not just be so headstrong that, this is what we plan to do and come hell or high water, we're going to make it happen, but learn from our mistakes. That was kind of long-winded.
No, that's excellent. And can that be done in large hierarchical organizations?
I definitely say it's more difficult. I think we'd all agree with that, but is it? So I guess what you're asking, is it probable or is it possible?
Well, I think it's possible. I think we could all, there are no absolute absolutes, but how about probable? I think that's a good vision.
Well, I wonder if it's like it's even more targeted than that. I mean, I think about giant companies, right? So think about the top companies that we all look at as like technology innovators, whether it's Google or Facebook or Apple. I first off, I don't know how those companies operate. I remember looking for jobs many years ago and kind of looking at those companies and going, hey, do you have any Agile coach roles? Hey, do you have any Scrum Master roles? And I didn't see any of those, which, made me kind of wonder, like, how are you continually putting out excellent products if you don't have this Agile stuff going on? And maybe it's one of those cases where those principles and that way of operation is so diffuse in their culture that they don't feel the need for those roles. But I also wonder if you're in a company that size, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. Maybe there are pockets that are better than others. Ultimately in the big hierarchy, there's probably not a level of consistency amongst the entire hierarchy. There probably are pockets that are really, really good and really, really awesome. And there are probably pockets that don't do any of what Mark described, that are really, really not so great.
As an example to that, I was reading an article recently about Google and how the author of this article was saying that they really have become less agile, less of bringing new ideas to the forefront and being trendsetters, because they have this big cash cow of these ads, these keyword ads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, who wants to give up the big cash cow to go out and break that up,
right,
when it's bringing a lot of money in? So it's an interesting quandary. You have to have money, but at the same time you have to innovate. And actually I'll share, so for my last company that I was in, they really got to the point where they had to innovate. They had this cash cow of this VB6 application that ran like hundreds of customers, and there was a single person that developed it. And he was a brilliant, special person. I can't say enough good things about him because he just made this happen. And I don't know of anybody that's just this one person that's without even a computer science background who just kind of made it happen. But, you can't stick on old technology forever, and then all of a sudden it's not supported anymore, and then the operating systems aren't supporting it anymore. And what do you do? And your hand is forced. So you have to invest. So maybe that's the question is, can we afford to be agile, or can we not afford to be agile?
There's also, I know you want to jump in here, Tom, too, but there's also the question of do you want to be Google employee 120,000? Do you think you're going to be able to make an impact there? Or do you think you would make more of an impact at a smaller firm? And so I know that's a quandary that a lot of people are dealing with as well. Yes, there's the Googles and Apples of the world have that cachet in terms of their name, but is your ability to going to be, whether you're an agile person or an engineer, is your ability to actually innovate going to be in that kind of context, or in kind of the context that Mark was talking about, where one person had this significant impact on the way this particular company operated? I don't know that that's there in large companies anymore.
To be healthy and in an organization, a team, do you have to have constraints?
Constraints can be a healthy thing. Yes, they can be a bad thing, but you have to have some. They seem very similar to the whole guardrails concept that we've touched on earlier. You have to have, whether the constraint is the domain you're working in, whether the constraint is the types of customers you're servicing, whether the constraint is the vision of the company, you have to have something there to guide your work every day. Otherwise, you're just coming in and playing with ones and zeros.
I'm just hearing, as you both have talked through this, whether it's the guardrails and some of the comments that Mark has pointed out, the getting to the end of life of a VB6 application. Good God. Those are constraints. Those force people to either think through, do something new, try something out, change your mindset, or go live under a bridge. I mean, I know that's hyperbole. Nobody probably went and lived under a bridge, but to whether it's healthy, agile, we're talking about that mindset earlier. Do we need constraints to continually force us to grow and learn?
So I would say yes. Now, do we need heavy constraints? Do we need big time governance? I'm not a fan of big government. I don't like people telling me what to do. And it's always so it's like in my subdivision, we have a homeowners association. The homeowners association has some bylaws that you have to subscribe to that, you're not going to put a car up on cinder blocks in front of your house. And most people are like, yeah, that's detracting from the value of my property. But, there are other like smaller things that are just like, if I leave a rake out overnight because I'm coming back the next day and you're going to write me up for that, is that what I want. Do I want to have a fine for that? So there's no magic. If we did have an answer, then Tom, Jeremy, the three of us, I mean, we would be multi-billionaires many times over if we had the magic answer for this, right? Sorry, I'm just a one-time billionaire, not a multi.
Tom's got another podcast, Billionaires Today.
I wonder if I can get those interviews.
Probably.
So is Cuban coming on after this?
There you go. There you go. There you go. Maybe not. We live in a very dynamic world. Obviously, some constraints. I wouldn't live in a subdivision with an HOA. I'm a ham radio operator. I want my antenna, even though I don't have one up. So I chose not to live in those. I think some of us choose to work for organizations with more or less constraints. You know, you once upon a time, Mark mentioned early on that you left someplace that you felt was too heavy and just wanted to, get on with providing value directly. Jeremy, you work in a more regulated environment, much more structured environment. I'm just starting a piece of work with a defense contractor. It's significantly more constrained, but I'll be done at some point, so I don't have to stay. So I can live with it for a while. How as an employee, how do you make those choices?
I think that there's a realization that I came upon when I joined this particular company that I'm working for right now. And it's to do the product development that we do, there has to be stuff in place. Otherwise, people are going to get hurt. People are going to, potentially lose limbs or lose their life. And so to me, I've always viewed them as healthy constraints. Yeah, they are a little bit heavy, but we've been able to stand up an agile mode of operation within those constraints, knowing that we bump into some of those guardrails throughout the way, but they are rarely inhibitors to the work that we're doing. I can't say that that's probably going to be the case in your case, Tom. Perhaps you'll find that the constraints are inhibitors to how you want to operate and how the consulting advice that you give your client. But in my context, I haven't really found much of a problem with the constraints in place.
Mark, you moved to a less constrained at one point. How do you deal? And you've mentioned that you like the lighter touch. How do you deal with that in your world when it starts to feel heavier?
So I haven't worked for the Department of Defense, and I haven't done worked for mission critical healthcare, but banking is highly regulated.
Oh yeah.
And I actually worked for a place that did criminal background checks on individuals. And the company was getting sued because they were gathering this data for the background checks to be able to create reports, right? But cases were going to court and they were getting thrown out of court. And before the records could get updated, people would run reports. And guess what? Even though this individual's record was thrown out, it was showing up on the reports. And then they would issue a lawsuit to our company because they're like, hey, this has been thrown out. Now I'm being penalized. Say hello to my lawyer. So that was a project that I was put on. And so I'll take a real quick detour here. If you ever really feel like, if you're the type of person who likes to get depressed, look at criminal background records. There are nothing that will make you feel worse about humanity than looking at criminal background records. Oh my gosh, It's awful what people do. But anyway, so yeah, that was something that I just had to come to grips with and had to understand. This was serious business that had to be done. And so, yeah, this did have to be something that had to have more rigor behind it. So did I mature? Maybe. I hate to say it depends, but
maybe it does.
Sometimes it does.
But the interesting thing about our roles, I think a lot of the work that we do is about thinking about flow of value across large, chains of things. And so I would hope that the work that we do gives us some aegis to question perhaps some of the heaviness of some of these things, whether they're innocent questions like, hey, why does that exist? Or no, really, why does that exist? Why do we need to do that? It's an inhibitor to the work that we're doing. I'd like to think that from our seats, we have the ability to do that in our daily work. And so that's maybe part of the reason I'm okay with the regulation in my environment, is because at the end of the day, if I encounter something that I think is wrong, that I think is an inhibitor to the work that we're doing, I feel like from my seat, I have the ability to raise that up and ask the question.
I guess it's possible. Gentlemen, we could go on for a while, and I would love to. Tomorrow morning, the sun is dawning. It's a wonderful day. Somebody wakes you up, hands you a cup of caffeinated beverage of choice. Mark, you could be, a nice Coke. Can tell that you're a Southerner. I mean, I remember waking up to that. Tea, coffee, whatever, right? And hands you a magic wand and 2 wishes that you could use to change anything in terms of making Agile more healthy in organizations. What would those 2 things be and why?
Well, so you don't just get 1 wish, we get 2 wishes.
Yeah, 2 wishes.
2 wishes. Wow. Choose carefully.
And you can't ask for more wishes.
Can't ask for more wishes.
I have to get that one. Somebody has done that before.
So I would say for me is just, so I will go with my 2 wishes. I'll have 1 internal and 1 external. 1 would be for others to be open-minded to new ideas and be willing to try things and be willing to fail and learn from them. The other is for me to be more open-minded, to be willing to fail and to learn from my mistakes. Excellent. Those are my wishes. All right, now grant them, Tom.
I wish I could. But now that you know them, you can actually work on granting them yourself. Mr. WIllets.
Sure. 2 wishes. Let me go a different direction. So I would like I'd like the people that occupy our roles who talk about Agile to maybe stop with the Agile is dead rhetoric and think about it a little bit differently. I think we've proposed some new ideas on this podcast or some different spins on this. I think the Agile is dead phraseology is perhaps a little too provocative, and it's not dead. It's maybe just changing a little bit. So I think my first wish is around that phraseology and that language. The second thing I think is an acknowledgement that we still have work to do to work to make sure that the principles and the values that we believe in are actually being embodied across organizations, and that the world of product development can still get better. There is still room for improvement. Whether or not Agile is now middle-aged or Agile is, perhaps past the end of the bell curve in terms of adoption, there is still work to be done. And that makes me feel good and optimistic.
I'm firmly in the camp of the beatings will continue until our mindset improves. Old kind of statement kind of thing. But gentlemen, this has been fantastic. At this point, how can people continue the conversation? How would they find Mark and Jeremy and all and continue this kind of a conversation?
Well, I don't have a big social media presence other than LinkedIn. That's like the central place that you can find me. So I think I'm the only Mark Metze, Metze. There may be one other that is an attorney. I do not have a law degree, so I'm not an attorney. So if you find one that's a Scrum Master and host of the Agile Within podcast, you found the right one.
You can look for me, Jeremy WIllets, on jeremywillets.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Certainly, Tom and I wrote a book. We've been on Mark's podcast. So those are just some of the current things I have going on. We're also doing a cohort on maven.com on this whole topic of work intake that's been pretty fun so far. We're in the midst of our current cohort and have announced dates for a future cohort. So depending on when this podcast airs, you can go to maven.com and try and find when the next offering of that is.
Well, I'll stick that in the show notes. Gentlemen, at this point, I always open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. Obviously, Mark, we talked a little bit, or you mentioned your podcast. Why don't you, give us the elevator pitch for your podcast.
Yeah, sure. So would love to have you come in and join and listen to my podcast. We release, and I say we, it's a huge corporation. We talked about these companies that are so huge and it's hard to make changes. The Agile Within it's tough to find change, Tom. It's, so it's a team of one. It's something that I do just because I enjoy it. Hopefully it brings value to others, or release one new episode every week with a different guest. Tom and Jeremy, you've been on the podcast before. We had a wonderful episode with that. So I just invite you all. If you can be so kind as to add a link in the show notes to the podcast, I'd appreciate it.
No problem. Absolutely not. Mr. Willets, anything else that you'd like to promote?
I'll put in another plug for Mark's podcast. I thought it came across my LinkedIn feed about a couple months ago, and I've enjoyed listening to every episode since.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your philosophy with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Thanks, Sean.
Learn to tame your work intake beast. Jeremy Willets and I have opened up a new workshop cohort to help you learn to tame your work intake beast. The workshop runs from May 31st through June 28th in 5 manageable 90-minute chunks. For more details, hop over to our Maven site, link in the show notes, or just go to Maven and search on work intake for more information. Sign up for the cohort or join the mailing list for future cohorts. We're also looking at an asynchronous version of the cohort. We'd love to have you along for the ride. In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 3, Deep Work is Meaningful, completes Part 1 of Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World by Cal Newport. If you are reading this chapter for the first time, my interpretation of the author's intent is not to prove that deep work is meaningful, but rather to argue that it's more meaningful than shallow work. I also point out that on deeper reflection, there are even more cautionary notes for the always in contact amongst us. Read the chapter, this week's reread post, and contemplate. Link in the show notes to buy a copy of Deep Work and to all the entries in our Deep Work reread. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 803, we will contemplate the product roles' impact on work intake. These roles appear straightforward and at the same time offer many layers and nuances. Regardless of the approach or structure someone is using, making work intake decisions might enhance or trash product decisions. And you know what? Somebody's making those decisions. We will also have a visit from Susan Parente, who brings her Not a Scrumdimentalist column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?